Now, we may not have received a general direct in the summer like we had expected, but at least we have one now. And personally, I didn't expect there would be too much to show off in this direct. I thought maybe they'd go over some games like Splatoon or like show off Bayonetta, and maybe get some news on Zelda, as well as some smaller projects. But then I was shocked when I saw it was over 40 minutes long, and even more surprised when those 40 minutes were just packed with non-stop announcements. Although personally, the one thing that I really wanted to see in this direct was if there would be a new Fire Emblem game announced, so we could finally know if those leaks we saw a while back were actually true, and seeing if the next protagonist of this upcoming Fire Emblem game would truly be sponsored by Colgate. And it turns out that those leaks for the next Fire Emblem game were actually real. Everything from the toothpaste-inspired protagonist to the hero summoning mechanic was shown off here, and I won't go into too much detail about this new game since I think I want to do a separate video about it, but I will say that this is the most beautiful looking Fire Emblem game that we have ever received. Typically, Fire Emblem isn't known for its graphics, but the graphics for this game are just amazing. This franchise has definitely come a long way since Awakening got the series back on its feet, which is ironic considering the character models for that game didn't even have feet. And now we have this game, which just has such an amazing art style and is a huge improvement on Three Houses. After the Fire Emblem announcement, we also got trailers for It Takes Two and a new Fatal Frame game which is finally being localized outside of Japan. I've always thought that Fatal Frame looks interesting, but I'm not a huge fan of horror games, so I've never actually tried any of them. But it's great that these games are finally leaving Japan and being shared with the rest of the world. Then we got the reveal of the next DLC pack for Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and the brand new character who's being added with this DLC. Personally, I don't really like the design of this character, and it sounded like their voice acting was really annoying with a really high-pitched voice. Gameplay-wise, she looks a lot like Poppy from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which should open up a lot of interesting customization options for people willing to use her. She definitely has more design traits in common with Xenoblade Chronicles 2 characters than any other character I've seen in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 so far, so I'm sure fans of 2 will be happy with her inclusion, though it's still not enough to get me to purchase the expansion pass with all the DLC yet. I'm still waiting to see what the story DLC will be like, and hope it's similar to Torna. Now surprisingly, there were some smaller indie-type games in this direct, which are usually saved for the indie directs. I was surprised to see Tunic here, since it looks like a really charming Zelda-inspired game, but I thought it was already on the Switch, and was surprised to learn that it still hasn't released on the Switch yet, since it just seems like one of those games that would be associated with Nintendo from the beginning. And then there was this really strange game called Ib, which seems to be really low budget, but I kind of like the art direction that this game is going in. It definitely seems to be more of a horror title, and a lot of the designs seem really uncanny and unsettling, and I think that the lower budget of this project just sort of adds on to that uncanny factor that this game is giving off. It's definitely one that I'll be keeping my eye on in the future. But one thing that seemingly came completely out of left field was the absolute abundance of farming simulators that were shown off here. There were games such as Fae Farm and Rune Factory 3 which were shown off, as well as an announcement for a brand new Rune Factory game. And then we got another look at Harvestella, which is a game that I think I might actually want to play if it weren't for the farm simulator aspects being integrated into the game. I would personally prefer to just go through the story instead of having to also manage a farm on the side to stay alive throughout the seasons, as it seems will be the case with this game. Maybe I'll give it a try in the future if I ever see it on sale. There are just so many games releasing around the time it comes out that I'm going to have to skip over it for now. But then something I never expected to happen was shown off, and that was a complete remake of the only Harvest Moon game I have played. Growing up, I loved this game, so seeing it get a remake now was really exciting, although I'm not sure if I do want to play it since these sort of games are huge time sinks, but it is one that I'm interested in. But if farming simulators aren't your thing, then I hope you like JRPGs, because those made up a majority of the other reveals. A third Atelier Ryza game was announced for the Switch. And then there was a sort of detective-looking RPG called Raincode, which to me looked like a mix between Persona and the Ace Attorney series as you go through these dungeons trying to solve a crime, while needing to use your investigation skills to safely navigate these dungeons and defeat the bosses. It's not one that I'm interested in, but I definitely respect the concept of it, and I'm sure there are many people who will be excited by its announcement. But perhaps the biggest JRPG announcement was for the sequel to Octopath Traveler, and I just love the art style of these games, but They're ones that I don't really have the time to play, and I'm not really too big into classic turn-based JRPGs, but I'm really happy for fans of these games, and I'm admittedly jealous that they get such great-looking games in a pixel art style that's extremely unique to what's being offered by other companies. Of course, you can't have JRPGs without Final Fantasy, and there were 2 Final Fantasy announcements here. The first for a Final Fantasy rhythm game, which I cared absolutely nothing for until it was announced that there was going to be Nier DLC, and I was momentarily tempted to try out the game just because of the Nier music, but I don't think I'm ever going to play this. And then we also got a look at the Crisis Core remake running on the Switch, and I was very surprised to see that this isn't a cloud version of the game. It's definitely not going to be as pretty as it will be on other systems, but I think it's great that this game is coming to the Switch without being a cloud version, even if I'm still going to play it on PlayStation 5 if I ever do decide to try it. But speaking of cloud versions of games, that is the way that the most recent Resident Evil games are being brought over to the Switch. Both Resident Evil 7 and 8, as well as the remakes of 2 and 3 are being brought to the Switch as cloud versions. Honestly, I'm surprised that companies are still trying to sell these cloud versions of games on the Switch, but I guess they must be selling, and it does give people who don't have other systems the opportunity to actually try these games, though I'm sure the experience of actually playing these sorts of games is better on pretty much any other system. And finally, to round off these JRPG announcements, a beloved classic is coming to the Switch in a disappointing way. Of course, I'm talking about the Tales of Symphonia remaster. The only reason I know about Tales of Symphonia is because a lot of people had wanted the main character included in Smash Bros. As DLC. I know this is an older game, and I think it's really disappointing that they decided to just go with a remaster because, honestly, as someone who doesn't know anything about this series, the actual graphics and character models of this remaster I thought looked terrible, like they came right out of a mobile port of the game or something. And it's not like the Tales series is a smaller franchise that can't afford to do better looking games, as some of their more recent games actually do look really great. And I think with a game as old as this, it really deserved to be fully remade from the ground up, rather than just remastered, as it's clear that the visuals for this game really haven't held up, and could benefit from being completely overhauled, as opposed to just slightly touched up and brought over to a new system. At least as an outsider, that's how I see this remaster. It could be that fans are pleased with this getting a remaster and didn't want a remake, but personally I don't think I'm going to give this game a try. But now let's get on to the actual reveals that people will really care about, and go over what Nintendo had to bring to this Direct. With the release of Splatoon 3, Nintendo used this Direct to announce a new Splatfest, which I'm sure fans of the game will be very excited to hear. Although, personally, I was hoping that if we got any Splatoon news, it would be about the new Big Run mode that they've been teasing, but have yet to release a lot of information on. Although I do know that the community really loves Splatfests, so this was probably the right decision. Then we got a look at the new Mario & Rabbids game coming out next month. Now, I never played the first one, and will likely skip over this one, but I think it's really cool that you can play as Bowser in this one. I hope that fans of the previous game will love this one just as much. And then we got more announcements going over games coming to the Nintendo Switch Online service for the Nintendo 64. And it seems to be another solid lineup of games that are going to be released over the next few months. I was very surprised to see the first 3 Mario Party games being added, especially the first Mario Party with how notorious it is for destroying joysticks with its mini-games. It could be that they just removed those mini-games from this port, but we'll just have to wait and see until it's released. They're also adding the first 2 Pokemon Stadium games, which is great for people who like to battle competitively. But to me, the most surprising inclusion in the expansion pass is GoldenEye. I'm sure people who never grew up with the Nintendo 64 won't be as excited for this reveal, but for those of us who did, GoldenEye was one of the best Nintendo 64 games, so it's great to see that it's coming back and will include online multiplayer. Though it is one of those games that I wish would be released separately, as I'm still not convinced to upgrade to the overpriced tier in order to get Nintendo 64 games included in Nintendo Switch Online. We also got a look at some upcoming DLC for other games, such as Mario Strikers, including Pauline and Diddy Kong, and 2 of the new tracks being included in the next Mario Kart 8 expansion. But perhaps the most disappointing DLC reveal from Nintendo was for Switch Sports, where it was announced that golf would need to be delayed until winter of this year. Perhaps the cruelest tease of this Direct was when Miyamoto came on. He started off by talking about the Mario movie, which I think everyone is just curious to see how this film will look by now. But after mentioning the Mario movie, he moved on to talking about Universal Studios and their Nintendo World, and how there's going to be a Nintendo World built at Universal Studios in Hollywood. But then he once again changed directions completely and spent way too long talking about the Pikmin mobile game, which I think it's safe to say no one really cares about. At least, no one watching the Direct wants to hear about it. The real thing people wanted was to finally get our first look at Pikmin 4, and after Miyamoto finished talking about the mobile Pikmin game, that's exactly what we got. A very brief tease at Pikmin 4, with no gameplay, just a small look at one of the environments. And then the second to last announcement of the Direct was for yet another Kirby game. This time a remake of Kirby's Return to Dreamland, which I'm honestly, shocked at how many games Kirby gets. There's already been 2 this year, and now we're getting a 3rd game coming out early next year. It's just ridiculous how many Kirby games there are. And that brought us to the final announcement, which everyone was expecting it to be Zelda related, and that is exactly what it was. Although it perhaps wasn't the big blowout people wanted for this game, but was more or less a very short teaser that didn't really reveal too much. But we now know that this game will be titled The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, and will be releasing next year in May. And while I'm sure a lot of people were disappointed by how brief this tease was, I am extremely pleased with it because I really don't want to know too much about this game before it comes out. And now that we know what the title is, I'm going to try and avoid any more information that comes out about this game, and try to go in as blind as possible when this game releases in May. But perhaps the most shocking thing about this Direct was what we didn't see. There were so many rumors going around that we'd be seeing Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD brought over to the Switch, that it was genuinely surprising when that wasn't what we got in this Direct. I mean, they have to come to the Switch eventually, right? I mean, they wouldn't keep these games stuck on the Wii U forever, would they? And then on top of that, still no news on Metroid Prime. I guess this is just another year where we don't see any gameplay from Metroid Prime 4, and sadly there's still no announcement about the Prime Trilogy being brought over to the Switch. Hopefully next year we finally get some news on Metroid, and I would really love it if they did bring the Prime Trilogy over so that I can finally play it and decide if I want to buy Prime 4. Now I could play it on the Wii U, but I would much rather play it on the Switch. And I'm sure there are many other people who are waiting for the Switch port so that they can finally get into the series as well. But other than that, I thought this was a pretty great Direct. It may have been overburdened with farming simulators and JRPGs, and I can definitely see how if you weren't into those genres, then you may not have been too impressed with what this Direct showed off. But personally, I'm really excited to see how the new Fire Emblem game turns out, and was extremely pleased that they didn't reveal too much about the new Zelda game. But those are just my thoughts on this Direct. What did you think? Let me know in the comments, and until next time, thanks for watching.